The ocean has always been unpredictable, but thousands of viewers watched in real time as a routine dive turned into a nightmare on that fateful day. A massive great white shark emerged from the depths, its movements swift and deliberate. What began as a thrilling live stream spiraled into chaos as the predator struck with terrifying force. Screams echoed, the water turned red, and the feed cut off, leaving the world in shock. This was not a movie, it was real, and it was only the beginning. These are 6 of the most horrifying shark attacks ever caught on record. The coast of South Africa had always been a magnet for thrill-seekers, divers, and marine life enthusiasts. The waters surrounding Gansbaai, often called the Great White Shark Capital of the world, were notorious for their dense shark population. For years, adventurers had come here for cage diving, hoping to get a glimpse of the ocean's most feared predator. It was a place of beauty and danger, where the line between man and beast was thin. On March 1st, 2025, that line was shattered most horrifyingly. Max "Shark Hunter" Davis was one of the internet's most daring content creators. At 31 years old, he had built a massive following by live streaming extreme adventures, pushing the limits of what most people dared to attempt. His audience loved the rush, the excitement of watching him dive into the unknown. Max had done everything from skydiving over active volcanoes to free diving with tiger sharks, but his latest adventure, swimming with great whites outside of a cage, would be his last. That morning, Max and his team boarded the Apex, a chartered boat captained by Richard Bowen, a local expert with over 2 decades of experience in South Africa's shark-infested waters. His cameraman and longtime friend, Jordan Fields, and 2 safety divers, Liam Carter and Diego Ramirez, were alongside Max. They had planned this trip for months, securing the necessary permits, studying the area, and ensuring everything was in place for a safe but exhilarating dive. The sun had barely risen as they left the harbor, the boat slicing through the waves on its way to an area known for frequent shark activity. The mood on board was lighthearted, the team exchanging jokes as Max set up his equipment. He had a custom-built waterproof camera mounted to his dive mask, ensuring that his audience would see everything from his point of view. A secondary drone hovered above, providing a breathtaking aerial view of the ocean. By the time they reached the dive spot, thousands of viewers had already tuned into the live stream. Max greeted them as he pulled on his wetsuit, the excitement in his voice evident. He spoke about the dive, how great whites were misunderstood, and how this would be his biggest adventure yet. But no one watching knew they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever. Jordan set up the final shots as Liam and Diego dropped the baited chum cage into the water. The smell of fish oil spread quickly, creating a slick on the surface. It was a common method used to attract sharks for research and tourism. Within minutes, dark shapes appeared beneath the waves. Shadows circled the boat swiftly, their fins cutting through the surface. The first great white arrived, a smaller one around 10 feet long, followed by another slightly larger one. The crew watched in awe, their cameras capturing every moment. Max, always the thrill seeker, didn't hesitate. He secured his mask, looked at the chat scrolling rapidly on his screen, and then slipped into the water. The drone hovered above, broadcasting the incredible sight. Max, floating in open water, surrounded by great whites. At first, everything seemed fine. The sharks were curious but not aggressive, keeping a distance as Max carefully maneuvered through the water. He moved slowly, deliberately, just as he had trained to do. His breathing was steady and he remained calm. The chat was flooded with excited comments from fans who couldn't believe what they saw. But then, something changed. Max's body language stiffened as he noticed movement from below. The water grew darker as a massive shadow rose from the depths. It was different from the others. Bigger, more deliberate. The 18-foot great white had arrived. Jordan, watching from the boat, immediately saw the behavior change. The smaller sharks moved away, their instincts telling them to avoid the newcomer. The predator was dominant and territorial. It was not here to investigate. It was here to hunt. Max tried to remain still, his training kicking in. He knew sudden movements could provoke an attack, but the shark was already locked onto him. It swam directly toward him, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The viewers on the live stream saw everything. The camera strapped to Max's head captured when the great white opened its jaws, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. A second later, chaos erupted. The impact was violent. The shark struck Max with incredible force, clamping its jaws around his torso. His body jerked as the predator dragged him downward. The muffled sound of his scream came through the microphone before the water filled with red. Jordan and the crew reacted instantly. Liam and Diego dove in, armed with long poles meant to deter sharks, but it was too late. The great white shook Max's body, thrashing as it pulled him deeper. The live stream went wild, thousands of comments flooding in, pleading, screaming, begging for it to be fake. But it wasn't. The water churned violently from the drone's aerial view before going still. The seconds dragged on like hours. The team desperately scanned the water, searching for any sign of Max. Jordan's hand shook as he pointed the camera at the ocean, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Then Max's body floated back to the surface. Liam and Diego reached him first, grabbing his vest and pulling him toward the boat. Blood streamed from his torso, his wetsuit shredded. His face was pale, his eyes unblinking. They hoisted him onto the deck, Jordan backing away in horror as the reality set in. Max was gone. The live stream cut off abruptly. Back on land, the internet exploded. Clips of the attack spread like wildfire. News stations picked up the story within minutes, and fans flooded Max's social media with messages of shock and grief. People who had watched the stream live struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't staged. It was real. Authorities later recovered footage from Max's dive camera. The last thing recorded was the shark's mouth engulfing the lens. The attack sent shockwaves through the streaming community and reignited debates over the ethics of extreme content creation. Scientists examined the footage to determine what had triggered such an aggressive attack. Was it the presence of bait, the movement in the water, or was it simply the unpredictability of nature? No one would ever know for sure. But what was undeniable was this. On March 1, 2025, thousands of people watched, helpless, as Max Davis, a man who had spent his life chasing danger, became the victim of the very thing he loved. The ocean had given him fame, adventure, and purpose, and in one brutal moment, it had taken everything away. The waters off the coast of Maine had always been unpredictable, a mix of beauty and danger. Fishermen knew to respect the ocean, and the U.S. Coast Guard was always prepared for emergencies. On February 18, 2025, Lieutenant James Harris and his crew received a distress call from a stranded fishing vessel battling rough seas near the Georges Bank, a notorious fishing ground known for its strong currents and deep waters. It was a routine mission, one they had done many times before, but no one could have imagined the horror that awaited them. Lieutenant Harris had served in the Coast Guard for over a decade. At 38 years old, he had earned a reputation for his leadership, calm under pressure, and dedication to saving lives. His crew aboard the Rescue 407 included Petty Officer Alex Martinez, Chief Engineer Greg Walker, and Seaman First Class Daniel Reeves. They were a tight-knit team, experienced in high-risk rescues, and trained to handle anything the ocean threw at them. That morning had started like any other. The team had checked their equipment, reviewed the standard procedures, and prepared for another long day at sea. Just after noon, a call for help came in. A Blue Horizon fishing boat had lost power and drifted dangerously toward the rocky outcrops miles offshore. The captain, Brian Caldwell, reported that his engine had failed, and the waves were growing stronger. The Coast Guard had no choice but to respond immediately. As Rescue 407 cut through the choppy waters, Harris stood at the helm, eyes scanning the horizon. The wind had picked up, sending cold spray over the deck. Martinez monitored the radio while Walker ensured the boat's engines ran at full power. Reeves double-checked the safety harnesses and ropes, knowing they would need them to secure the stranded vessel. They spotted the Blue Horizon struggling against the waves an hour into the mission. The fishing boat bobbed violently, tilting at dangerous angles. Caldwell and his two crew members were visible on deck, waving desperately. The Coast Guard team wasted no time. Harris maneuvered Rescue 407 into position while Martinez and Reeves prepared the tow lines. Then something strange happened. The ocean around them briefly became eerily still, a silence that never felt right at sea. Standing near the boat's edge, Walker noticed movement beneath the surface, a dark, massive shape. Before anyone could react, the water exploded. A 20-foot great white shark launched itself from the depths, ramming into Rescue 407 with such force that the entire boat shook. Martinez lost his footing, nearly tumbling overboard before grabbing onto the railing. Harris shouted orders, trying to regain control as the ship lurched to the side. The shark's attack was unlike anything they had ever seen. The impact sent a deep echo through the hull. The men on the blue horizon stared in shock, frozen as the beast circled beneath the Coast Guard boat. The shark came again, slamming its massive body against the vessel. Harris turned to assess the damage, his instincts telling him something was wrong. That's when the shark struck again. This time it launched halfway out of the water. The attack happened so fast that no one had time to react. The great white surged forward, its jaws wide, and clamped down on Lieutenant Harris. There was no struggle, no time for anyone to intervene. The shark's bite was swift, its razor-sharp teeth slicing through flesh and bone instantly. Harris's body never hit the deck. One moment he was there, standing, giving orders. The next he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Blood stained the side of the boat and the deep red mixed with the ocean spray. The shark, still moving beneath the surface, disappeared into the dark waters as quickly as it had appeared. Martinez stood frozen, his hands gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Reeves collapsed to his knees, his mind unable to process what had just happened. Walker stumbled backward, his breath ragged, as if the world around him had shifted into something unreal. But there was no time for shock. The shark wasn't finished. A sudden splash near the blue horizon sent waves crashing against the boats. The fishermen on board scrambled back, their fear evident. The shark had circled. It was coming back. Martinez snapped out of his daze, his training taking over. He grabbed the emergency flare gun, firing a shot into the water. The bright red flare hissed as it hit the surface, temporarily distracting the predator. Reeves rushed to secure the boat while Walker scrambled to run the engine. They needed to get out, fast. The men on the blue horizon were still stranded, but getting closer to them now was too dangerous. The only option was to wait for backup. Martinez grabbed the radio, his voice shaking but firm as he called in an emergency distress. They had to hold on. The ocean remained restless, with waves slamming against the hull and violently rocking the boat. Every second felt like an eternity as they scanned the water, expecting the great white to strike again. But it didn't. The shark was gone. The backup arrived within minutes. Another Coast Guard vessel, Rescue 209, appeared on the horizon and moved fast toward them. They could secure the blue horizon and get its crew to safety with reinforcements. But no one spoke about what had happened. There was nothing to say. The loss of Lieutenant Harris was felt immediately. He had been the heart of the team, the man they looked up to, the leader who had never hesitated to put himself in danger for the sake of others. The reality of his death hadn't sunk in yet. It didn't seem real. The Coast Guard station prepared for their arrival as they returned to base. The news had already spread, and the crew barely spoke on the journey back. They could not express what they had witnessed. The attack shocked the entire Coast Guard. Sharks are always dangerous in open waters, but never before had one been so aggressive or precise in its strike. Experts reviewed the footage to understand what had triggered such an attack. Some speculated that the rough weather had agitated the shark, while others believed the vibrations of the boats had drawn it. But none of that mattered to the men who had been there. Lieutenant Harris was gone, and the ocean had claimed another life. The warm breeze swept across the white sand as families lounged under the bright sun. June 10, 2024, and the Blue Haven Resort in the Bahamas was packed with tourists enjoying summer vacations. Among them were Thomas and Rachel Carter, a couple from Texas, who had brought their 2 children, 10-year-old Max Carter and his 7-year-old sister Lily Carter, for a long-awaited getaway. The resort was known for its luxurious amenities, endless cocktails, and crystal-clear waters. Guests swam freely in the shallow surf, unaware that something far more dangerous lurked beneath the waves. That morning, the Carters explored the nearby town before returning to the beach for a lazy afternoon. The resort staff served drinks to lounging parents while children splashed in the shallow waters just a few yards away. Max and Lily had begged their parents to let them swim while they sat with their friends, Jason and Emily Foster, another couple they had met earlier in the week. The kids had been warned to stay where the water was shallow, and with lifeguards stationed further down the shore, the parents felt there was little to worry about. Max, an adventurous boy, enjoyed swimming farther than his sister, while Lily, more cautious, stayed close to the shoreline. They played, laughing as small waves crashed over them, unaware of the dark shadow lurking beneath. The Bahamas had long been home to bull sharks, known for their aggressive nature and ability to hunt in shallow waters. Unlike other sharks, bull sharks often came closer to shore than expected, blending in with the warm currents. It happened without warning. Max had just ducked underwater when a sudden force hit him from below. The impact was violent, knocking the air from his lungs. He barely had time to react before a crushing pain exploded in his right leg. The water around him turned red as a massive 10-foot bull shark clamped its powerful jaws down, shaking its head from side to side. Max thrashed, kicking with his free leg, but the shark's grip tightened. Lily, only a few feet away, heard the muffled splash and turned to see her brother's terrified face just before he disappeared beneath the surface. She let out a scream that cut through the noise of the beach, her small hands reaching out toward him as she waded closer. On shore, Rachel sipped her cocktail, laughing at something Emily had said when she heard the scream. Her body tensed immediately, motherly instinct kicking in. She turned toward the water and saw Lily flailing, pointing toward where Max had just been. Rachel's drink slipped from her fingers, the glass shattering against the wooden lounge chair. Thomas and Jason were already on their feet, sprinting toward the water. Other beachgoers turned their heads, some rising from their towels, trying to understand what was happening. Further down the beach, the lifeguard noticed the commotion and bolted toward them, blowing his whistle. But he was too far. Max surfaced again, his face twisted in agony. Blood poured from his leg as the shark pulled him deeper. Lily's screams grew more frantic as the creature released Max momentarily, only to turn toward her. She barely had time to react before it lunged, its teeth grazing her small arm as she kicked wildly. Rachel reached the water just as Thomas dove in. The once clear ocean was now stained with red. She could see Max floating limp, his leg torn open, his face pale. Thomas grabbed his son, pulling with all his strength. The shark turned toward them again, but before it could strike, the lifeguard, Ryan Hale, charged into the water with a rescue buoy, aiming directly at the predator. Ryan had been trained for emergencies, but nothing could have prepared him for this. He swung the buoy as hard as possible, striking the shark's snout. It hesitated, circling back for another attack. Jason had reached Lily, scooping her into his arms while Rachel grabbed them, dragging them toward the shore. The shark was relentless. It darted forward again, its dark eyes locked onto Max, but Ryan swung again, hitting it directly on the gills. The sudden pain made the predator recoil, and for a moment it backed away, giving them just enough time to get Max out of the water. Once on shore, Rachel collapsed next to her son, sobbing as she pressed her hands against his mangled leg, trying to stop the bleeding. Lily trembled beside her, clutching Jason's arm, tears streaming down her face. Emily grabbed the nearest towel, wrapping it around Lily's injured arm. More lifeguards arrived, one of them carrying a first aid kit. Ryan worked quickly, tying a tourniquet around Max's thigh, his hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping. The resort's medical team arrived within minutes, radioing for an ambulance. The sight of Max's injuries made some of the beachgoers turn away, unable to stomach the amount of blood pooling in the sand. Max was rushed into surgery the moment they arrived at the hospital. His injuries were severe, but the doctors worked quickly to save his leg. Lily's wounds were treated, her arm bandaged where the shark had scraped her. The doctors reassured Rachel and Thomas that she would heal, but the emotional scars would take much longer to fade. News of the attack spread quickly. The resort issued a statement, temporarily closing parts of the beach for safety assessments. Tourists who had witnessed the attack were left shaken, and some cut their vacations short. The lifeguards were praised for their quick actions, but Ryan couldn't shake the memory of the moment he locked eyes with the shark. The morning of September 5, 2021, started like any other for Olivia Marsh. The 32-year-old seasoned diver had spent years exploring the waters off the Bahamas coast, studying marine life and guiding tourists through the breathtaking coral reefs. On this particular day, she led a small group of divers on an expedition to an offshore reef near Bimini, a spot well known for its vibrant sea life. The dive site, a few miles from the shore, was a place Olivia had visited dozens of times before. The clear waters, the schools of colorful fish, and the occasional appearance of hammerhead sharks made it a thrilling destination for divers. She was accompanied by her diving partner, Eric Foster, a marine researcher, and 3 experienced divers, Rachel Nguyen, Adam Carter, and Daniel Ortiz. Their goal for the dive was to document reef conditions and observe hammerhead shark activity. The waters around the Bahamas were home to several sharks, but hammerheads were a special sight. Known for their distinctive head shape and heightened sensory perception, these sharks were usually non-aggressive toward humans. Olivia had encountered them on many dives before, and each time had been an awe-inspiring experience. After checking their equipment on the boat, the group descended into the water, moving slowly toward the reef. The visibility was excellent, and the scene below was exactly as they had hoped. Coral stretching out in every direction, fish darting through the reef, and the occasional stingray gliding across the ocean floor. Olivia led the way, guiding the team deeper. The first few minutes were peaceful, with the only sounds being the steady rhythm of their breathing through their regulators. Then the first hammerhead appeared. It was a large female, at least 10 feet long, swimming just beyond the reef's edge. Olivia signaled to the group, pointing at the shark as it moved gracefully through the water. More soon followed. Within minutes, half a dozen hammerheads were circling nearby. Olivia felt no fear, only fascination. She had seen them before, but never this many at once. The sharks swam in slow, deliberate movements, passing close enough that Olivia could see the details of their broad, flat heads, and how their small eyes scanned their surroundings. Eric, who had a camera strapped to his wrist, began filming. Everything seemed normal until Olivia noticed a shift in the shark's behavior. At first it was subtle. The smooth, effortless movements of the hammerheads changed. They became more erratic, swimming faster and closer. One shark broke away from the group, moving in a tight loop before returning. Olivia had never seen them act this way before. She signaled to Eric, asking if he noticed. He gave a slight nod, his hand tightening around his camera. The tension in the water grew. The hammerheads continued circling, and Olivia's instincts told her something was wrong. Then, without warning, a massive male, easily 14 feet long, turned sharply toward her. In a fraction of a second, it closed the distance. Before Olivia could react, the shark lunged, its powerful jaws clamping down on her leg. A sharp pain shot through her body as the shark's teeth sank deep into her thigh. The force of the attack pulled her downward. Olivia's mind screamed at her to fight, but the shock paralyzed her for a split second. Blood clouded the water and the hammerhead thrashed, dragging her away from the group. Eric saw it happen and immediately sprang into action. He kicked hard, reaching for Olivia as she struggled against the shark's grip. Rachel, Adam, and Daniel followed, their movements frantic. Olivia clawed at the shark's snout, trying to force it to release her, but its grip was relentless. It twisted its head violently, trying to pull her deeper. Eric grabbed Olivia's arm, yanking her toward him while slamming his free hand against the shark's side. Adam reached into his gear pouch, pulling out a dive knife. He swam forward, stabbing the shark's gills in desperation. The hammerhead jerked, loosening its hold just enough for Olivia to break free. She kicked hard, propelling herself toward Eric, but her leg felt useless. Blood poured from the deep wound, staining the water red. Enraged by the attack, the shark whipped around and charged them again. Rachel grabbed Olivia's other arm, helping Eric pull her away. Daniel swam ahead, signaling toward the boat. The team needed to surface immediately. Olivia's vision blurred as they ascended. The pain was unbearable, but she forced herself to stay conscious. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body, and the blood loss was making her dizzy. She knew she had to keep moving. If she blacked out now, she might not make it. The surface felt impossibly far away, but finally, they broke through. The dive boat was only a few feet away, and the crew was already on high alert, having seen the blood spreading in the water. The captain, Marcus Hale, threw a rope over the side while another crew member, Jake Lawson, reached down to grab Olivia. Eric and Adam pushed her up onto the boat, their hands slick with her blood. Rachel and Daniel climbed up right after, scanning the water below, fearing the shark would follow. Olivia collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. Her wetsuit was shredded, her leg a mangled mess of torn flesh and deep bite marks. Jake grabbed the first aid kit, working quickly to wrap a tourniquet around her thigh, tightening it to slow the bleeding. Marcus radioed for emergency assistance, giving their location to the nearest medical team. Olivia clenched her jaw, trying not to scream as Jake applied pressure to the wound. The pain was unbearable, but she refused to let herself pass out. The boat sped toward the mainland, bouncing over the waves. Eric sat beside Olivia, gripping her hand and whispering reassurances, even though she could barely process them. Rachel and Adam kept their eyes on the water, their nerves still raw from the attack. None of them spoke about what had just happened. The reality was too overwhelming. By the time they reached the dock, paramedics were already waiting. They lifted Olivia onto a stretcher, rushing her toward an ambulance. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was the worried faces of her team. Doctors worked through the night to save her leg. The damage was severe, deep muscle tissue torn, ligaments shredded, but they managed to prevent amputation. Olivia remained in the hospital for weeks, recovering not just from her physical wounds but from the psychological trauma as well. The attack sent shockwaves through the diving community. Reports of aggressive hammerheads had been rare, and experts debated what had caused the sudden behavior change. Some speculated that overfishing had disrupted the shark's natural hunting patterns, making them more desperate. Others believed it was a territorial response, an instinctual reaction to the divers entering their space. For Olivia, none of it mattered. The ocean, once her sanctuary, had turned into something terrifying. The scars on her leg would always remind her of the moment she came face to face with one of nature's most powerful predators. On November 2, 2023, a group of marine researchers set out on what was supposed to be a routine expedition off the coast of South Africa near False Bay. The team, led by Dr. Sarah Jacobs, had been tracking great white sharks in the area for months, collecting data on their migration and feeding habits. The waters around False Bay were well known for their high concentration of great whites, making it a prime location for research. The team's goal that day was to retrieve tracking data from an 18-foot male shark they had tagged 2 months prior. It was a familiar process, something they had done countless times before. No one on board had any reason to believe this trip would be different. The team consisted of Dr. Jacobs, marine biologist Thomas Reed, research assistant Emily Carter, and 2 volunteers, David Langston and Rachel Moore. They set off early that morning on the Sea Watcher, a well-equipped research vessel. The air was crisp and the ocean stretched endlessly before them. They followed the signal from the tracker, which led them about 8 miles offshore. As they neared the location, the beeping of the tracking device grew louder, confirming that the shark was close. They patiently waited for the great white to emerge from the depths, using bait to lure it toward the boat. The massive creature emerged within minutes, its dorsal fin cutting through the surface. It was an incredible sight, a testament to the power of nature. The team worked quickly, using a reinforced hook and pulley system to bring the shark onto the deck safely. This difficult process required precise coordination. When they finally secured the shark, Dr. Jacobs and Thomas moved in to take samples and measurements. Everything seemed normal until Emily noticed something strange while inspecting the shark's belly. The stomach appeared unnaturally bloated. At first, they assumed it had just fed recently. Great whites were known to eat large prey and could go days without hunting again. However, something about the way the stomach bulged felt off. Dr. Jacobs decided they needed to investigate further. Thomas made the first incision with careful precision. The moment the blade cut through the thick skin, a putrid stench filled the air. Everyone recoiled, covering their noses, but the worst was yet to come. As Thomas and Dr. Jacobs widened the incision, something unexpected slipped out, a human arm. Emily gasped, stumbling backward. The others stood frozen as they processed what they were seeing. The arm was partially decomposed, but the flesh was still recognizable. A wetsuit sleeve, torn and covered in stomach acid, clung to the remains. The realization hit all of them at once. There was more inside. Dr. Jacobs forced herself to continue. They pulled out more remains, piece by piece. A second arm, a section of the torso, a leg still wearing a diving fin. As they worked, it became horrifyingly clear that there were not just one but two human bodies inside the shark's stomach. Rachel, unable to take the sight any longer, turned away, her hands shaking. David whispered a curse under his breath. No one spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the boat's engine and the distant cries of seabirds overhead. Dr. Jacobs knew what they had to do. She reached for the radio and contacted the mainland. Within minutes, she was connected to local authorities. The team described what they had found, their voices strained. They provided the GPS coordinates and prepared to return the remains to shore. Forensic experts and law enforcement officials were waiting by the time they docked. The remains were carefully taken from the boat and sent for examination. DNA testing would be needed to confirm identities, but everyone on board already knew who the victims were. A diving tour had gone missing off the same coast 2 weeks earlier. A group of 3 divers, led by an instructor, had ventured into the waters for what was supposed to be a recreational dive. Only one member of the group, the instructor, had resurfaced. He had been found floating near the dive boat, barely alive, suffering from severe shock and dehydration. He had been unable to recall what had happened to the others. The disappearance had baffled authorities. An extensive search had been conducted, but no bodies had been recovered until now. The remains found in the shark were later identified as 2 missing divers: Jessica Palmer, 27, an underwater photographer, and Megan Holloway, 31, an experienced free diver. The news devastated their families, who had been holding on to hope. The discovery sent shockwaves through the local diving and fishing communities. Great white sharks had long been a part of the waters around False Bay, but an attack of this scale was nearly unheard of. Theories began circulating. Had the divers been attacked directly, or had they drowned due to an accident, their bodies later scavenged by the shark? Forensic experts examined the remains for signs of pre-mortem injuries. The bite patterns suggested that at least one of the women had been alive when the shark struck. Speculation grew about what might have triggered such an event. Some experts suggested that overfishing and climate changes altered the shark's behavior, making them more aggressive. Others believed the divers might have unknowingly ventured too close to a feeding ground. Whatever the cause, the result was undeniable. 2 lives had been lost, consumed by one of the ocean's most feared predators. As the news spread, authorities warned diving operators in the region. Additional safety protocols were implemented, and some tours were temporarily suspended. For marine researchers, the discovery changed the way they viewed their work. Dr. Jacobs had always respected sharks, understanding their vital role in the ecosystem. But that day on the Sea Watcher, she had seen firsthand the raw, unforgiving nature of the ocean. False Bay, once a place of wonder, now carried a darker story. The warm waters of Mauritius had been the perfect setting for Lily and Jack Harrison's honeymoon. The island, known for its breathtaking beaches and coral reefs, had been a dream destination for the newlyweds. They had arrived 3 days earlier, spending their time exploring hidden lagoons, taking sunset cruises, and savoring the beginning of their life together. On February 14th, 2025, Valentine's Day, they decided to go for an early morning swim to experience the ocean's quiet beauty before the beaches filled with tourists. The resort they were staying at was located near Le Morne, a stunning coastline with clear blue waters stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a place where honeymooners often came to snorkel and swim. The seas were calm that morning, inviting the couple to wade further. Jack, 30, had always been comfortable in the water, while Lily, 28, preferred staying closer to shore. But with no reason to fear that day, she followed her husband into the deeper waters. They laughed and splashed, enjoying their time alone in the open sea. Unknown to them, a predator had been lurking nearby. Mauritius, though a paradise for travelers, was also home to great white sharks that migrated through its waters. While shark attacks were rare, they were not impossible. Over the years, there had been sightings, but the risk never seemed high enough to stop visitors from swimming freely. Jack swam ahead of Lily, diving beneath the water and resurfacing with a playful grin. He called for her to come closer, urging her to swim deeper. Lily hesitated momentarily before pushing herself forward, unaware that something massive had begun to move beneath them. Without warning, the water around Jack erupted. A force unlike anything Lily had ever seen pulled him down. A great white shark, nearly 16 feet long, had struck with terrifying precision. Jack disappeared beneath the surface, the calm sea instantly turning violent. Lily screamed, her body frozen as she searched for him. The water around her turned red. A second later, Jack's head emerged, his arms thrashing, his face contorted in agony. He tried to reach for her, his eyes panicked, but the shark wasn't finished. The massive predator returned, clamping down on him again, dragging him further away. Desperate, Lily swam forward, reaching out, but their distance grew. She called for help, but there was no one nearby. The resort's lifeguards were too far to hear, and the other tourists on the beach were oblivious to the horror unfolding in the water. Jack struggled against the shark, but its strength was overwhelming. Lily could see his eyes lock onto hers for one final moment before he was pulled under again. This time, he didn't resurface. Lily kept calling his name, swimming frantically to where he had disappeared. She felt something brush against her leg, a movement too strong to be a wave. The shark had returned. Terror surged through her as she realized she was the next target. She turned, kicking with all her strength, trying to distance herself and the predator as much as possible. The shark circled her, its dark silhouette just beneath the surface. She knew she wouldn't be able to outswim it. Then the attack came. The force of the hit knocked the breath from her lungs. The shark's body slammed into her, sending her tumbling through the water. She thought she was being pulled under for a moment, but instead she was pushed toward a floating piece of driftwood. She clung to it, barely able to keep her head above water. Her body ached, her arms trembling as she scanned the water for any sign of Jack. But he was gone. It felt like hours before she heard the sound of a motor approaching. A small rescue boat, operated by 2 resort workers who had finally spotted the commotion, was speeding toward her. They pulled her from the water and wrapped her in towels, but she barely registered their voices. All she could do was stare at the blood-stained waves where Jack had been just moments ago.